All right, let's get this thing underway. So this is actually the very first webinar for the members only of Brojo that we're starting with me being overseas now. And so I thought if we're going to get started from the beginning, then we should look at the basics. We should look at the fundamental practices, I should say, of self-development and revisit something that ultimately what we're going to be covering in this webinar, I believe, is all you really need to know in order to create a life that is very authentic to you, constantly builds your confidence, and deals with the natural problems of life as effectively as possible. You know, we're going to talk about that today. Before we do, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. This mostly applies to people like yourself, James, who are on the call, but also anybody who's going to join calls later. These calls are going to be hosted on Zoom, an online app, and it's designed for group conferencing, but the way I use it is I like to mute everybody while I do my big rant, and then I can open up space for discussion, questions, etc. Periodically throughout the discussion. If I keep everyone's mics open, unfortunately there's too much background noise and it screws with the recording and stuff, so I keep everyone muted while I'm talking, and then I'll open up the lines as often as I can. Chris, welcome, mate. Good to see you. And when it comes to using the Zoom app, I'll just go over a couple of the basics there. Hey, Chris. I'm just going to mute you, man,
Hey.
while I do my little intro rant. Good to see you, bro. So those of you who haven't used Zoom before, whether you're on the phone or on the computer, there's a couple of things to know about. First off, there is, on the computer, if you hover your mouse over the screen, little icons down the bottom left will come up. One that probably says mute under it or unmute under it. It looks like a microphone, and then one that looks like a video. So you can turn off your video or microphone and turn them back on anytime you please. So if for some reason you need to get naked during the call, feel free to turn your video off or leave it on. It's up to you. And the mute, you can turn that off and on. Like if you want to speak and for some reason you can't get my attention, you can unmute yourself and start yelling away there. You'll also see down the bottom a little speech bubble with a couple of dots in it. That's the chat box. So the best way I think to manage these calls from my experience is if you want to jump in with something, actually make a note in the chat box there. So you can just write in, you could either just write the word question, which means you've got a question for me, or if you just want to make a brief comment that you want me to speak to, you can just type your comment into the chat box there. And you can also, once you get a bit more familiar with Zoom, you can see that you can send people messages privately throughout the call. You can chat with each other throughout the call, or you can just blast it to the whole group there. So that's the basics of how to use Zoom and how we'll kind of manage these calls. And I want you guys to participate as much as possible, and at the same time try and keep it structured so that it doesn't turn into a noisy mess with the technology. So that's the basics of using Zoom. And like I said before, we are doing the fundamental practices of self-development today. The kind of things that no matter what's going on in my life, I try to stick to these things because I know that they have the biggest impact on my confidence and my integrity as a way of living. Because no matter how far along, like a lot of you guys listening might be quite far along in your journey, so to speak, you're feeling pretty good about yourself and doing a lot of great stuff. But no matter how far along you are, the fundamentals are always the key practice for any discipline, aren't they? You know, whether like I'm a Zouk dancer, I guess, and I'll go and do private lessons with some of the best Zouk dancers in the world, you know, some of the top instructors and performers. And no matter what, whenever I go to do a private lesson with them and ask them what I should work on, they always work on the fundamentals with me. My basic stepping, the way I hold my body, the frame and of my body. They don't give me anything fancy. They never try to teach me anything new. They just go back to the basics over and over again because they know that it's practicing those basics and getting them flawless that makes the rest of the dance superb, and excellent. So whether you're a dancer, guitarists are the best guitarists in the world. When I see them warming up, they're still doing the same basic scales and patterns that I learned in my first week of guitar. They go back over the fundamentals again and again and again. And anybody who skips the fundamentals usually is not a true master. The real masters, like of martial arts or anything, 99% of their practice time is spent doing the fundamentals because they know that's where the mastery comes from. It's the same for entrepreneurship or something more along those lines. The fundamentals of entrepreneurship is building relationships with clients, building relationships with the audience. A true entrepreneur never forgets that and never stops practicing that, no matter how high up or how big their business gets. So the reason I wanted to do the fundamentals today is because confidence, self-confidence, is not a mood. It's not a feeling necessarily. It's not even a personality. It's a way of living, or at least for the definition that we'll use here at Brojo, it's a way of living. Feelings of confidence will come in and out of your life. Sometimes you'll feel sure of yourself, sometimes you won't. But in terms of creating an overall high baseline of self-certainty, of confidence, it's all about how you live each and every day, the measurable behavior you engage in. One of the things I'm running my the Honesty Effect program at the moment, and one of the key things we realize is a lot of guys are measuring themselves based on their thoughts and feelings, which is a dangerous practice because your thoughts and feelings are wildly uncontrollable and often very inaccurate in terms of how your life's actually going. You might feel really down about yourself, but you're actually behaving quite well recently, So your way of living, the behavior you engage in, how much integrity that has, the fundamentals must serve that. Your daily practice must encourage that as much as possible. So what we're going to talk about today are the 6 pillars of confidence as described by values. So we're going to be using the 3X model to talk about the 6 kind of fundamental practices that need to be happening every single day, if possible, for you to live with confidence rather than trying to be a confident person or feel confident. The kind of fundamental practices, just like a dancer or a kickboxer, that will constantly keep you at the top of your game. Cool. So I'll just pause there. If anybody has any questions or thoughts, type them into the chat box. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep on ranting, which is okay as well. So the 3X model is broken into 3 phases: explore, engage, and release. And what we've discovered since we've been adapting this model is there's kind of 2 values that belong in each phase. Previously, there was just 1, but we've broadened that out a little bit because there are supportive values for the main values there. So we're going to start with the explore phase. The explore phase is essentially 2 values that need to be lived by every day. And we're actually starting with what I believe is the beginning value, the one value that if you don't live by this, you can't really live by any of the others. And that value is responsibility. People who do not take responsibility for their life, which is not the same as taking the blame, become victims to it. Whether you're creating your life or whether your life is happening to you is a choice you make. Now, you can't control the things that happen to you, but you can control how you react to them and what you make of your resources available, as opposed to feeling that your decisions, your actions, and everything like that are forced upon you somehow, which is the victim perspective. Now, translating responsibility into a daily practice can be quite difficult, but it's essentially very simple. It is a commitment to take responsibility for your life and to define what taking responsibility means. And I think the simplest way to do this is to have a morning routine. So a morning routine is not just a practice that people do because they heard that some entrepreneur they admire does it. A morning routine is a conscious effort to take responsibility for your life. It's a way of putting you front and center at the beginning of the day to set a precedent for the rest of the day. Compare that with somebody who has no morning routine, who gets up after snoozing the alarm 5 times and they're now already behind. They rush through getting prepared for work, and they're eating their breakfast in the car while they're still half asleep, and it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock at work before they fully wake up. That person will have a momentum of being behind the entire day, of being kind of dragged along by life because they didn't take responsibility for it at the beginning. They'll be a little bit late for work, which means they'll be frustrated, which means people have trouble interacting with them, which will lead to more problems. And it'll feel like this, they're just being bowled over by this wave of never-ending bullshit. When it all started with the beginning of the day and how they began that day. So a morning routine, whatever it is that you do, is about taking control of your day from the beginning. Now, I don't mean controlling the things that happen to you, but controlling you. So my morning routine, to give you an example of this, involves, first and foremost, is I get up and I have an ice cold shower. Now, the reason I have an ice cold shower is mostly to push myself to do something I don't want to do. That is the number one reason I do it, and I do it every day. I have never in my life wanted to take an ice cold shower. Okay, I'm never going to get used to it. It doesn't get any easier. Every day, I'm equally as afraid of doing it as I was the day before. And that's why I do it. With this practice, it puts me in a position where I'm starting the day by choosing to do something painful that's good for me. You know, ice cold showers have a lot of health benefits. They wake you up like nothing else. They get you started. So rather than waking up about 11 o'clock in the morning, I wake up when I have my shower. And I get started with this kind of take control of my day, choose the pain that's good for me attitude. That's why I have a cold shower. I'll then follow that with some stretching to wake up my body, amidst some brushing my teeth and all that stuff as well. I'll do a few minutes of meditation, and then I'll do some journaling. Now, the stretching and the meditation is just to wake up my body and mind. That's all that's for, is to like kind of throw off the shackles of yesterday and get started fresh for today. And the journaling is to review any lessons I've learned from the day before and also to start taking responsibility. So the journaling serves as a tool where I basically identify what I can control and should control, and I let go of what I can't. That's what responsibility is about. Choosing what you can influence and what you should influence to have integrity, and committing for that day to focus on that stuff. You know, and to transform any blame that you see building up into problem solving. So if I'm like, oh, this thing keeps happening to me because blah, 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 you drop the because part because you don't really know why anything's happening to you. And you go, what am I going to do about it? And if the answer is I can't do anything about it, then I let it go. And if the answer is I can do something about it, I ask if I should. And if I should, then I do. And that is how you take responsibility in the morning. So I think it's really important to start your day with a process of taking responsibility, because your automatic pilot will probably be victim mode. It's the same for most people. It's to do with our ancestry. We're designed to be social pussies who wait for a handout. You know, that's how humans have evolved over the last 10,000 years or so. So if you don't consciously redirect towards responsibility in the morning, your default will be to victimize yourself. And if you've lived this way for a while, you'll know that playing the victim usually doesn't work out too well for you. So those are my thoughts on taking responsibility. Chris, James, you guys on the call, if you have any thoughts or feelings around that, you can chuck a comment in the box there or unmute yourself and jump in to chat. All right, I'll keep going. Curiosity. Oh, okay. Chris, you put your hand up. Nice work. I didn't know you could do that. All right, let me unmute you here. All right, Chris, you're on the line, mate.
Hey, yeah, great to be online. And I just have a question regarding the morning routine. I'm working on that lately. And does the order or the sequence matter in terms of what you do first and what you do last prior to going to work?
What I'd say is, rather than does it matter, is experiment with it until you find something that seems to have the best effect on you. You know, my morning routine has significantly changed over the last couple of years as I kept sort of adding and changing bits depending on how they made me feel and in general how the day went. Now, for example, bringing in the cold showers, I noticed in my journal that on the days where I did the cold shower, I was generally more focused and more onto it than the days that I wasn't. And so the cold shower got to stay. Now, in terms of the order I do them in, I have a little theory. I do the cold shower first to wake myself up. That's partly the order. Like, I can't do any of the other ones properly unless I'm awake. So the cold shower one has to be first. The stretching and meditation, to me, it doesn't really matter what order they go in, but I do them both before breakfast. I find it hard to do stretching, bending, and stuff like that if I'm full of food. And meditation also, I find it hard to do if my stomach's gurgling away and things like that. So it's more a matter of convenience as to which order I do them in. But I don't think it matters that much. It's more about choosing a routine that you find works for you over time. It might be completely different to my one. You might go for a walk in the morning or a swim in the water at the beach and then have a chat with your partner. That might be your morning routine. Whatever it is, make the purpose of it to take responsibility for your day, to set yourself up with a good momentum from the moment you wake up, or you'll be victim to a different momentum kind of caused to you. Does that make sense? Oh, you've muted yourself. So hopefully that answers the question. Alrighty, let's have a look at curiosity, which is the main value of the explore phase for the 3X model. Curiosity, another way to phrase curiosity is learning something new or evolving. So curiosity, I believe, is a mainstay of your life. Basically, when you lose curiosity, you stay still in an evolutionary sense. And staying still means you get left behind because the rest of the world's evolving with or without you. So curiosity, in a general sense, is about constantly learning something new so that you're never left behind. And there's a range of reasons for this. One is that one of the main types of confidence is competency. So you're more likely to feel confident when you have a range of skills. Hey, Mike, welcome on board, mate. Yeah. So you're more likely to feel confident in yourself if you have a range of skills, and you're more likely to have a range of skills if you're constantly learning new things. Okay. Now, having a range of skills is not the be-all and end-all of confidence, but it is a contributing factor for sure. Very unskilled, uneducated people have much lower rates of self-worth, you know. So there's also another reason for curiosity is I think it's incredibly important to always be at a beginner level for something. Because if you're not, you are very likely to become complacent. You know, consider yourself as always being at risk of becoming addicted to feeling comfortable and familiar. The human brain is wired for that because the human brain's the same as it was from, dozens of thousands of years ago. All right, many millennia ago, our brains were the same as they are now, but the environment we lived in was very, very different, where we were constantly fighting new things all the time. So any opportunity to be comfortable was gladly taken and very beneficial. These days, we're just surrounded by opportunities to be comfortable. It's very rare to be challenged without seeking it out. But unfortunately, with things like complacency and comfort and familiarity, you breed contempt, you breed obesity, you breed dissatisfaction with your life, you lose track of who you are. There's some real risks in staying comfortable for too long. We're not designed to, okay? So always being a beginner at something basically ensures that will not happen. There's a constant confusion that must be overcome when you're a beginner, and that's kind of like I imagine like an elderly person doing Sudoku puzzles. It keeps you sharp to constantly have to deal with confusion. Too much confusion and you'll be overwhelmed. But if you just got one new thing that you're working on any given time, there'll be enough confusion in your day to keep your tools sharp, to constantly have to problem solve, to go from knowing nothing to knowing something. That step is so critical to confidence and to general life adaptability. So if right now you feel like you're the master of everything in your world, you desperately need to bring something new in there, something where you will be the worst student in the class, something where you will have to, be humble, hat in hand, and ask better people for advice. 5 minutes a day makes all the difference here. I've pretty much always got a huge number of new things happening in my life. Right now, I'm learning how to speak Czech. I'm just starting to take up some new martial arts. I'm even learning how to do magic card tricks, right? It doesn't really matter what it is that I'm learning because it's all new skills and most skills are transferable. They'll come in handy somewhere in my life. The point is that I'm new at something and I have to really engage that child youth-like part of my brain that starts from scratch with open-mindedness and curiosity. So competency is a big part of confidence. And if you're doing something new all the time, then in a longer term period, you build up a huge range of skills. I'm starting to finally see the benefits of that. I must have had 20 different hobbies in my life at least. And they're just the ones I stuck with for some time. There's plenty of things I picked up and put back down. And what's funny now is I might go on a range of, might be exposed to a range of situations and I can kind of do a lot of stuff there. So I might be at the party and I can show people some card tricks. And then I was hanging out with my friend and her friends and I started doing some drawing for her kid, and I could do some pretty decent, not an excellent artist, but some decent drawings for her kid. And then I went snowboarding and then I went to the new martial arts class. I was able to do stuff to a pretty decent level in all of those massive range of situations simply because I've spent so much of my life learning new things. So I've got this broad range of skills. You think about it back to our ancestral days, this means the range of skills that include hunting and foraging and gathering and dealing with social society structures and being an artist and all these things. If you had a huge range of these skills, you would have been highly valued in the tribe. And of course, all of that would have added to you feeling pretty damn good about yourself. So if you don't have anything new going on in your life, change that ASAP and make sure it's not just new, but that you suck at it to begin with. That you're not doing something new that you're already going to start off as talented or good at, but actually really being bottom of the pack and working your way up. And every time you have worked your way up, go find a new starting point. So even if you're, say, learning how to dance, don't just stick in the beginner's class all year round so that you can be the best beginner. Go to the next class and suck again, and then go to the next one, level up and suck again. Make sure you always suck compared to your fellow students, because then you'll know that you're constantly developing and you're constantly fighting that complacency. So, responsibility and curiosity. Those are the elements of the explore phase that I think should make a daily appearance in your life. Any thoughts or questions from you guys before we move on to the engage phase? Maybe you can just chuck up your hand there, or you can chuck a comment in the chat box. Nope. All right, let's move forward. Okay, the engage phase. So essentially there's two values in the engage phase of the 3X model that develop you the most. And they hold hands with each other. And those values are courage and honesty. Courage is one of the most obvious values when it comes to confidence building. A lot of people actually think of confidence as fearlessness. And so courage is no major surprise. But one of the issues with courage is people think courage is an absence of fear, that you're courageous if you feel bold, if you feel brave, if you feel confident, then you're being courageous. But I would argue the opposite, which is that you're only going to be courageous if you're shitting yourself while you do it, if you're afraid. So in order to include courage in your life, there needs to be a deliberate seeking out of fear, a deliberate attempt through action to put yourself in a situation where you are afraid. That is the only way to ensure that courage plays a role in your life. And even people, this is actually one of the ones people get most complacent of, people in self-development, because they go, at first they face a lot of fear. And then, they get to a point where they're quite emboldened and there's very few things left that they're genuinely afraid of. And they kind of sit back on their laurels a bit. They go, well, I'm pretty bold now, so mission accomplished. And there's no more fear in their life. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing to take a rest every now and then, but if you've been unafraid for quite some time, then odds are you're now complacent. And, one of my former clients, Emma, she talked about how the comfort zone shrinks. That's absolutely true. It's just like if you let a skill go rusty. If you leave it for a long time, when you first get back into it, it's like you're just starting again, even though you quickly pick it back up. The same thing happens with courage. If you're avoiding fear for a long time, the things you're afraid of will start to close in on you. I've like, for example, I spent a whole year going up and approaching strangers on the street. I got to the point where that really didn't scare me at all. And so I kind of wrote it off as something that I'm no longer afraid of. Then about a year later, I ran a workshop for Brojo to take guys out. And as we were going towards the streets, I'm like, holy shit, I'm scared again. It had come back. Now, it only took me a couple of approaches to people to say hi for the fear to go away again. But it was back. Definitely. I was nervous again. So fear doesn't just get solved permanently and never comes back. It is a practice. And so rather than trying to overcome a fear and get rid of it forever, it's better off to practice courage so that whenever fear occurs, you are able to deal with it. So rather than trying to get rid of fear, you build your ability to move through fear. It's a much more practical approach. So for example, like I said earlier in this call, the reason I take a cold shower every morning is simply to do something I'm afraid to do. I'm always going to be afraid to take a cold shower. I don't mean that I'm panicking with terror, but I'm always repugnant. I'm repulsed by the idea of stepping into that ice cold water. So that means it's always an act of courage for me to do it. So every day there's a little bit of courage there, even if nothing else throughout the day scares me. That's what I included in my morning routine. And at the end of this call, we're going to be talking about what's called supernova activities, which are activities that ensure that you live by a lot of your values every day with a minimal effort. So fear comes in many forms, and the most devastating form, I believe, is procrastination. The reason I think that's devastating is because people don't often realize that it is fear. So somebody can think of themselves as very bold and courageous, and yet they keep putting off certain tasks till later. And they don't link the two ideas. They don't think I'm doing that because I'm afraid, because they don't feel afraid. But procrastinating on an important task that's integral to your authenticity is definitely because of fear. There's no other explanation for it. You're afraid of doing it. You're afraid of the hassle of it, the consequences of it, the effort it requires, the potential failure involved, whatever. There's something about it that scares you. So in terms of making courage a practical action, there's a very simple concept. It's not mine. It's called eating the big ugly frog, which is no matter what you've got lined up for your day, pick the biggest, hardest thing that you're most kind of avoidant of doing and do it first, no matter what it is. If that is your daily practice, then you can be sure that there is at least some courage being practiced every day. Because there's the one task that even if you just feel a bit hesitant, that is fear. You don't have to be terrified of something to be afraid. Terror is just an extreme version of the emotional state of fear, but fear comes in many forms and many disguises. And hesitation, justification, delaying something for this big story of a reason, that's fear. So if every day you go, what's the thing I'm most simply afraid of doing? What's the thing I'm least motivated to do, but is very important for me to do? Do that thing first. This has a double effect also of helping you train yourself to realize that you do not need to be motivated to take action. You don't need to feel good about something to do it. You can feel absolutely awful about something and still do it. It doesn't stop you. It's bizarre that people believe that. So many people think like, oh, I want to go to the gym, but I just can't because I'm not motivated. And yet they'll go to work every day without feeling motivated. They get up at like 7 a.m. Like, oh, I don't want to go in today. But they still end up going in every single day. You don't need to feel motivated to do things that are important for you. And eating the big ugly frog, as it's called, doing the big hard thing first, whatever that might be, is a great way to practice and remind yourself of this. And the last point I make, obviously with courage, for most people, not all, but for most people, the most courageous act that they can do, especially socially, is to have confrontations. And I bet right now, any of you, no matter how far along you are in your journey, could write a list right now of all the things that you're a little bit bitter or resentful or annoyed or frustrated or confused about to do with other people that you haven't told them about yet. I'll bet there's a list. So before you go ahead and call yourself fearless, make sure that list is empty. Make sure that you've gone and had every confrontation that you've failed to have or put off or delayed in some other way. Courage through confrontation, I believe, is probably one of the most effective confidence building tools. To go out there and make sure that you deal with shit and you nip it in the bud before it grows into something, and not allowing yourself to talk yourself out of doing it, to convince yourself that it's not a big deal or that it doesn't matter because you're not going to see them again, or, I should just sweep it under the bridge. No, go and do it even if it's some minor thing, so that just to practice courage, not to change the other person's behavior or get a certain result or even to get more respect, but just to practice courage. So those are my thoughts on courage. Hopefully that's enough to give you some practical guidance. If you guys have any thoughts or questions, now's the time. Jump in the group chat or do the little hand raise thing that Chris figured out that I can't figure out. Otherwise, I'll just keep rattling on. Okay. So the next part of the engage phase, or should I say the main value of the engage phase, is honesty. Now, I actually realized lately that honesty is a byproduct of courage. Simply, if you're feeling fearless about being honest, then you will be honest. It's very unlikely that you'll be dishonest out of any reason other than fear, unless you're psychopathic, which is a different thing altogether. So working on your courage is actually probably the best way to work on your honesty. Is if you become courageous, if you're able to take action while afraid, then being honest becomes a whole lot easier. Okay. Self-development, I've talked about this in a recent podcast. Self-development isn't about being a better person. It's about having the courage to express whoever you are more honestly, more shamelessly. You don't need to improve on what you are. You just need to get it out there. Any improvements that need to be made, any insecurities that need to be overcome, or any traumas that need to be healed, that'll be a natural byproduct of you honestly expressing yourself. But who you are, there's nothing wrong with that. The idea that there could be something wrong with that is ludicrously inaccurate. You cannot determine what right and wrong is when it comes to a person. You could be a serial killer. We still can't say that that's actually wrong. What you are on the inside, there's nothing wrong with that, but how you express it can be very harmful or very helpful. And how honest you are usually determines that. If you express who you are very dishonestly, if you're shameful and apologetic and deceptive and manipulative and hiding who you are, the long-term effect is a life not lived and no real connections with other people and constant shame and burden of secrets. And it's a harmful way to live. This isn't a moral question. It's a practical one. The more secrets you keep, the more your life sucks. It's very simple. This can be measured in many studies. You can get severe back problems from keeping big, dark secrets. Secrets are a burden on the mind psychologically. The less of them you have, the more free you are to think. I think it's like, who was it, Carl Sagan? He says, if I'm honest, I don't have to remember anything. And that's simple put, all that moderation you do in social environments where you're careful about what you say, it's because you're keeping secrets. If you're not keeping any secrets about yourself, at least, then you don't need to be careful about what you say. You can't trip yourself up if you don't care if the truth gets out. So increasing honesty, it's essentially about noticing all dishonesty. I think of it as like weeding dishonesty out of your life. And it begins within. And this is why journaling is so important, is your biggest lies are the ones you tell yourself. They're the stories you tell yourself to explain behavior that doesn't align with your values. When you do the big justification about why you didn't say this or you didn't do that, or it's not the right time for this, that, and the other, what you're essentially doing is lying to yourself. It's okay to pussy out of doing something. What's not okay is pretending that you didn't pussy out. It's okay for me to go, look, I didn't confront that person because I'm just scared they won't like me and I have an attachment to approval. That's fine. You don't have to be a fucking superhero. You're allowed to be afraid of stuff and too afraid to act. What's not going to help you is when you go, look, the reason I didn't talk to them is because it's not really the right time right now, and they look busy and maybe I'll put it off until next Tuesday. Well, we'll see. Maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. That's the bit that harms you, where you don't admit to yourself the real reason why you do shit. The fact that you have to tell yourself a big story, that you have to concoct this fiction, is the proof of the lie. There is no creativity in truthfulness. You don't have to think of what to say, you just say it. When you have to think of the story, where you have to really craft the experience, that must be some form of fiction. It's script writing. So in terms of practicality, you have to notice all of your dishonesty. This actually helps for courage, because one of the best things for courage is anger. Anger, frustration, annoyance, whatever you want to call it. One of the things that helps you override fear the most, to move forward even when you are feeling afraid, is when you're more pissed off about not doing it than you are afraid of doing it. That's what kind of anger is for. It's the override for fear. So if you constantly notice and admit all your dishonesty to yourself, eventually it's going to piss you off. And it will piss you off enough for you to finally have the power to act on it. If you keep looking at the girl that you want to ask out and you say, I can't today because she's on her phone, or, maybe I'm just not the right kind of guy for her, and you keep lying to yourself, you can do that for the rest of your life and you'll never take action. Whereas if you're journaling at the end of the day and you look, the real reason I didn't talk to her is because I'm afraid of rejection. And so I missed out on an opportunity because I chose to not be afraid today. Now you keep telling yourself that, eventually you're going to get sick of writing that. And you're going, you know what? I can do this because this is only me. Nothing's stopping me. There is no real reason I can't talk to her. It's just the story I tell myself that I don't want to be afraid. Do I really care that much about being afraid that I'm not going to do this time? And eventually it builds up to the courage. Increasing honesty in a practical sense is also about killing your fantasies, killing the identity you wish you were. Going from wondering what might happen to finding out what actually happens. Your fantasies are all those stories you tell yourself in your head about what could happen, what hopefully will happen, or what hopefully won't happen. Honesty is about making sure of whatever happens. It is making it impossible to fantasize. And I think as a daily practice, identifying at least one fantasy you have and killing it is probably the most effective way to be more honest in your life. So if every day you think, what fantasy do I have that I'm not taking any action on? Like, I hope I get the promotion, and I imagine myself having a promotion at work and making more money and blah, blah, blah. Or, I fantasize about the girl at my office that I like asking me out, and we end up having a beautiful life together. Or I fantasize about being, having a six-pack or whatever. All these kind of things that aren't happening and you're dreaming of. There's always an honest action that you can take, or an honest set of words you can say that will kill the fantasy one way or the other. They'll either bring it true, or they'll prove that it can't come true. So for example, if I'm worried like, oh God, I wish I could get the promotion, I wonder if I'm good enough, go apply for the promotion. Fantasy over. Either you'll get it or you won't. Either way, the fantasy dies. You wish that girl would ask you out, go ask her out. Fantasy will die again. So finding an action you can take every day that kills a fantasy is a great principle. And what it'll do is actually build up to an automatic pattern. I do this now. As soon as I'm hoping something will happen, I go and put an end to it as quickly as possible. I've noticed I do this a lot these days. If I think, oh, I wonder if that person, would be interested in coaching, I'll send them an email straight away. You interested in coaching? Boom. No more wondering. It's over. I'm like, what will my girlfriend think if I do that? Maybe she'll be okay with it. Maybe she won't. Well, I better go tell her about it. Then I'll find out if she's okay with it or not. And the more you do this, the easier it is to do. And the more repulsive it is to not do it. If you're sitting in fantasy world all the time, you're not really living. It's kind of like you're watching a movie rather than participating in life. And there's really no gains in confidence to be made living that way. Okay, so that is courage and honesty, the engage phase. Is there anything you guys want to jump in with around that before we move on there? All good. Chris says, amazing. Thank you, mate. That strokes my ego. Not that it needed stroking. It's big enough as it is, but I appreciate it anyway. Cool. Let's move on then, eh? Which brings us to the final phase of the 3X model, the release phase. The most neglected phase. I really want to emphasize that people involved in self-development, even when they're like really getting into learning new things or trying to be more honest and engaging in more action, they still tend to really neglect the measurement, reflection, healing part of the model. And because of this, they eventually will not see progress or think they're not seeing progress. And they'll also avoid dealing with painful truths that have been building up. The longer you leave a truth before you deal with it, the more painful it is to deal with. And that's why people neglect this phase, is they don't want to face the uncomfortable stuff. So in the release phase, we're talking about acceptance and we're talking about respect. Those are the two values we'll be talking about, two of the most neglected values in people who engage in self-development and just in people in general. Like if I'm talking about the 3X model with a client, whether they're just getting started on working on themselves or whether they're a diehard enthusiast, what I find is almost invariably they'll be strong in one of the other two aspects of the model, but they'll be really weak in this one. And the weakness will be holding them back. It's what Mike and I have been calling walking with a limp, essentially. You've got an injury that you're not dealing with, and the longer you walk with that injury, the more pronounced the limp is, the more you're held back by it. So let's talk about acceptance, or accepting reality first and foremost. The 3X model is all about living as truthfully as possible, having integrity, and you can't live truthfully if you're not working with reality as it is, as close to it as humans can possibly perceive. If you're living in a dream world or a fantasy world, or living on beliefs that are completely untrue and have no evidence to support them, then everything you do will be a fiction. The foundation where you're starting is fictional, so anything you build on top of that will be fictional. Well, we'll talk more about this as we go on, but say, for example, if I have a belief that the world is fair, which is a completely fictional belief that does not align with reality, my version of fear is certainly not being played out in the world. But if I have that belief, then I might end up developing nice guy syndrome, where I think if I'm good to people, they'll be good to me. And I develop a whole persona based on a fiction. And so the release phase in the acceptance phase is about realizing these fictions, coming to terms with reality as it is. It can be as simple as meditating and as complex as going to a seminar about the latest in scientific research. Acceptance is about finding reality and adjusting your beliefs accordingly, which we'll talk more about in the respect phase. The simplest practical way to do this is journaling. And for those of you, for members, Mike's done a great course on Introduction to Journaling. I highly recommend you all take it. Journaling is about noticing the difference between real problems and predicted problems, about stuff you can deal with and stuff that doesn't even exist. It's about seeing the progress you're making as well as noticing the flaws and errors of your ways, rather than imagining those things. Most people who get into self-development do so because they have self-worth issues, which means that they tend to measure themselves unfairly negatively. Okay? Most people I meet, if they measure themselves, they're more critical than they are positive. And the others I meet are too positive. They think of themselves as awesome and they're not noticing their faults. Neither of these approaches is helpful. Like all things, a real helpful approach is a balanced one. Here's what I do well, and here's what I need to work on. And here's how I apply what I do well to the things I need to work on. That's what journaling is about. Journaling goes, look, I kicked ass in this thing, went really well, but the same situation a week later totally fell to pieces. What's the difference in those situations? What do I learn here? How do I make it so next time both situations have integrity? So measuring yourself accurately, not only does it allow you to develop a realistic sense of who you are and how you're doing in the world, but it also will slowly over time replace that compulsion you have to give a fuck what other people think of you. The only reason you care what other people think of you is because you've never cared enough about what you think of you. Because what you think of you as being too negative or too positive, usually too negative, has not been something you've really wanted to explore. And this is why people avoid journaling, I think. They don't want to go into their mind and see clearly that they don't like themselves. But you got to go there. And you got to fix that fucked up perspective you have of yourself and make it more accurate. It's amazing how many people will have acceptance for others but not themselves. You know, it happens all the time. Like one of my clients, she would, if somebody came to her with self-worth problems, she would be very compassionate. She'd be like, look, you're too hard on yourself. Like you've done this thing well and done this thing well. And yeah, you got to work on some stuff, but that's going okay. And yet if she was alone looking at herself, it'd be nothing but negativity. It's what I call reverse entitlement. People who do not find reality, who aren't constantly looking to, separate the difference between real problems and imagined ones and actually acknowledge their real strengths as well as their weaknesses. They tend to, how do I say it? They tend to be reverse entitled. So they believe they're entitled to worse treatment than they give to others. They're nastier to themselves than they are to other people. It's a type of entitlement because it means that you're special. You deserve special treatment, like a martyr, right? Journaling is about going, you know what? I am just a human being. I am just another ant in the colony. There's nothing special about me. And that's actually a good thing. I need to figure out what me being a human needs to be for me to enjoy this life. I need to figure out, I know Mike's a big proponent of doing like psychological testing and assessments to get a different sense of who you are, get feedback from validated sources. Doing the Myers-Briggs assessment, or my favorite one I've ever done in my life was the psychopathy assessment, because it turns out I'm way more psychopathic than I ever believed. But doing all these assessments to get a sense of who it is that you are, what strengths you can use and exploit, and what weaknesses you either need to work around or improve on. We all have both. And there's nothing wrong with having weaknesses. It just usually means that there's certain areas of life that, like for example, if I'm a hardcore engineering-minded person, then there's very little point in me trying to make it as a career artist. I'm much better off looking at becoming a mechanic or becoming a bridge designer or something like that. I'll not only find it more enjoyable, it will be aligned to the way I'm wired. Whereas if I try and, like you see this on American Idol all the time, somebody getting on stage and you're like, dude, you cannot sing. What the fuck are you doing up there? You'll probably never be able to sing. Why are you there? That person isn't useless. It's a monkey trying to swim rather than climb a tree. They haven't been accurate about who they are and what they should be focused on, which is it's information that's not going to come from other people. Nobody else knows what you are and what you should be working on. You need to figure that out one day at a time with journaling. Measure yourself accurately, and eventually other people's opinions on who you are and what you should do with your life will become less and less important. However, other people's feedback on your behavior can become a very helpful tool. So rather than asking people if you're a good person or a bad person, you can ask the judge at the competition how your dance performance was. You can ask the fellow people at Toastmasters tips and tricks on how you can improve your presentation. you can get feedback that will actually help you develop skills rather than getting emotional, personal feedback on who you are as a person, which from anybody else is completely irrelevant. Fuck what they think. And journaling will help you genuinely believe that what they think is less important than what you think. So I won't go too much deeper, but accepting reality through journaling, coming to the point where you can see what's real and what's true versus what's imagined, will also serve that first value of responsibility, because now that you know what's true and what's real, you can choose to take responsibility for it and do something with it. So I really want to emphasize it's the most neglected part of the model, and most people I talk to are the least consistent with journaling out of everything that they do for self-development, and I think this is the thing holding them back the most. One of the problems with journaling is it doesn't necessarily feel good to do, and you will not notice immediate benefits. You won't write a single journal entry and go, fuck, I'm a better person now. It's not like that. It's more like, ouch, there's that thing I have to work on. Okay, so be it. That's what journaling usually, I think, should feel like if it's being productive. What happens after 3 years of journaling is you know more about yourself than most humans know about anything. And that is a powerful place to be in. That's when you know, going into a situation, what you need to watch out for, what strengths you can exhibit, what mood you're in. You'll be in touch with all your emotions. You'll be in touch with your beliefs. You'll know where your blind spots are. That kind of situation is going to serve you very well. And that just comes from years of journaling. Yeah. Getting to know you, building a relationship with yourself. Okay, if you've got any thoughts or questions about that, jump on the chat box or raise your hand or do a little dance, whatever. Question, Chris. I tend to leave journaling for the end of the day, and by then I'm tired and leave it for tomorrow. And sometimes tomorrow I postpone it. So when is the right time of day to do it? Just great question. That's why I do my journaling in the morning, because I found that if I tried to leave it till nighttime, I neglected it because I'm too knackered. Journaling can be done at any given time and in a range of different ways. There's two that I've found are quite effective. First off, find the time in the day that works for you. Okay, so if it's not the evening, then do it sometime else. Okay, do it on your lunch break, do it in the morning. It doesn't matter as long as you're looking back. Okay, I like to do it in the morning for two reasons. One is I'm more likely to do it. Two is it helps me set up responsibility for the day. And actually there's a third reason, which is I've had a chance to sleep on the previous day, so I'm not as emotionally attached to what happened anymore, and I can view it a bit more objectively. So I can look at my behavior and go, oh, that's why I did that. I'm more likely to be able to do that 24 hours later than I am to do it 3 hours later. So that's what a time that works for me. The other ways to do it is to take notes and then review notes. So a couple of guys on the Honesty Effect program, what they do is throughout the day, they'll notice a sort of significant piece of behavior or an event or a feeling, and they'll either use a phone app to write it down or a notepad, or maybe they'll make a little voice recorded note for themselves. And then at the end of the day, they simply listen back or read over these things and allow themselves to digest the information and analyze it. So find, like all of the things I'm talking about today, find a way of doing it that works for you rather than trying to find someone else's way of doing it. Or use someone else's way of doing it to test if that works for you, and if it doesn't, change it. There is no right or wrong time to do any of these things. It's more about the right or wrong time for you personally, what works and what doesn't. Hopefully that answers the question. So if you're leaving it for the end of the day and you don't do it, then stop doing it at the end of the day, because that's not working for you. Simple. Cool? All right, mate. Let me know if that didn't quite answer the question. Let's move on to the very last question, the last value. Cool. Last value is respect. Respecting yourself, respecting others, respecting the universe as a whole. Morning routine is another way of living by respect because it's making time for you. I'm not a huge Tony Robbins fan exactly, but one of the things he says is if you can't make 10 minutes for yourself every day, then what the hell are you doing with your life? And I think it's so true and actually so relevant. There are so many people who in an entire 24-hour day, they do not make 10 minutes for themselves. 10 fucking minutes. They can't do it. They're too busy serving everybody else's needs that are mostly imagined in their heads anyway. respecting yourself, how can you expect to be confident if you don't respect yourself? Respect is not a feeling, it is a behavior. It is creating a space where you are the priority in that space. That's essentially, I think, the best way to describe respect is a priority given to something. So if your priority is constantly given to things outside of yourself, then you're constantly disrespecting yourself. If your priority is constantly to yourself, then you're constantly disrespecting everything else. So if you're a narcissist, it doesn't mean you're living by the value of respect because you're disrespecting everybody else. And if you're a self-hater, somebody who's constantly a people pleaser, putting everybody else first, then you're constantly disrespecting yourself. That's not respect. People pleasers and nice guys often think of themselves as respectful, and yet if you only measured the behavior they do towards themselves, you'd have to conclude they are disrespectful people. And that's the truth. If you're not making time for yourself as well as working well with others and respecting the environment you're in, then you're not living by the value of respect. There is a balance to respect. And in fact, balance itself is an act of respect. So time for you is a huge part of respecting yourself. There should be some time set aside for you every day. We'll talk about supernova activities in a moment. And that's one of the reasons I do a morning routine, is because it hits so many of my key values all at once. It hits courage with the morning shower, it hits responsibility with the journaling, and it hits respect with the meditation and the stretching. This 10-minute period at the beginning of my day just puts Daniel front and center and takes good care of him and sets him up well for the rest of the day. 10 minutes is really all it takes. And it's amazing the days where I don't do this, how different those days are. Especially if I don't do it a few days in a row. My stress levels go through the roof. I'm confused about my direction in life. I'm snappy. I'm less likely to be honest. All sorts of things happen when I neglect this for just a few days. And those same things are quickly remedied when I just bring it back on board. That morning routine, that 10 minutes in the day, I can't describe exactly what it does to me. I just know it's extremely beneficial. Yeah. So respecting yourself, it comes after acceptance in my model, because you need to know what's real before you give respect to it. You don't want to be giving respect to imagined fictional things. They don't deserve respect because they're not real. Respect needs to be given to what's real. So seeing the world accurately through your journaling, and then coming to a point where you're going to work with the world as it is, that's a form of respect. So for example, if I ask a girl out and she says no, and I keep buzzing around her like a fly in the friend zone, I'm not respecting the fact that she's not into me. Okay? I'm disrespecting that. Whereas if I go, you know what? She is not into me. I need to change the way I live based on that information. In which case, then I might go, you know what? I don't want to be just friends with her, so I need to actually cut her out of my life, because there's no healthy way for me to be involved with her. So I'm going to go hang out with someone else instead. That is respect in action. Okay, that's what respect looks like. So when it comes to living by the value of respect, you identify what's real in the acceptance phase, and then you live according to what you've discovered, no matter how painful that might be, in the respect phase. Completing your to-do list is often an act of disrespect that many people get into. Busyness is an act of disrespect. And the reason I say this is because your whole to-do list is not equally important. You might see it that way, but that's untrue. There's very little in your to-do list that's actually important. The rest is kind of noise that even if you didn't do it, nothing bad happens. So forget about completing your to-do list and doing what's important, and then resting after you've done what's important is a balanced way of living with respect. You know, we've been talking a lot about dopamine lately in Brojo, and there's nothing wrong with dopamine. It's the fact that people binge on it doing unhealthy activities that causes so many problems. But dopamine's there as a reward and a quick fix healing process for after you've been through stressful events. So let's say you get into the process of respect where you do the big ugly frog task in the morning to respect what's most important to you. And then rather than plowing through the rest of your to-do list, you take a half-hour break. You let yourself off. You've done the big important thing. You'll find that there's very little else you need to do with your day after that. You've kind of nailed it for the day. There may be 2 or 3 things in that category, but there's certainly not 12 or 15 things that need to be done today. There's just 12 or 15 things that you told yourself need to be done today, and that is a disrespect. Dopamine's okay, so what I talk about is earning it with a contract. So for example, if my little dopamine hit is watching a show on Netflix, I have to earn that. It's like, okay, I'm allowed to watch 1 episode of Black Mirror after I confront my girlfriend and tell her that thing that I've not wanted to tell her all day. So I can watch that show on Netflix, but I have to do it after I've told her that thing. That's respect. I respect that was a hard thing for me to do and I need some recovery time after it. But if I was to then binge on Netflix, I'm getting unbalanced again. I'm stopped living by respect. The contract was 1 show in exchange for that confrontation. I need to abide by that contract to have respect. Abiding by contracts in general is respect, and the contract should be respectful of both people. For example, if I show up late to work, I'm disrespectful to my boss. But if he keeps me back late without paying me more money and without my explicit consent, that's disrespect. If I give that consent without asking for more money, that's disrespecting myself. You need to be very wary of the contracts that you're getting yourself into and make sure that all the expectations are open, that the agreement is fair and balanced, that both parties are being respected by the agreement. If that's ever not the case, then you're the one who's failing to live by respect because you choose to be in this agreement. So respect is a lot about open expectations, agreements, and contracts, either with yourself or with other people. If you're going to reward yourself for something, great, earn it. And then don't binge on the reward. Make it balanced to the action. Do the hard stuff first so that you don't have to do everything. I'm reading the book Sapiens. I think it was Mike actually recommended it. Geez, it's a mindfuck of a book. I highly recommend it. Yuval something or other. I can't remember his last name. And, one of the things that he talks about in that book is the simple fact that the hunter-gatherer Homo sapiens, the original humans, had an easier life than we do. Simply put, they certainly had an easier life than those who lived during the agricultural revolution. Right now you work way harder than you need to just because you believe you need to. It's very true. You do not need to work as hard as you do. In fact, the best book I could recommend for learning about respect would be The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. That book rocked my world when I realized I'm working about 80% too hard and I don't need to. I just do so out of some sort of guilt that I've been conditioned to believe in by teachers and parents and later by bosses so that they can get their needs met through me. So that's respecting yourself like in the workplace in terms of your workload. Then there's also respect in terms of your interactions socially. Balanced interactions. I think probably the best thing I can speak about practically here is the way you listen to people. If you're socially awkward or anxious or attached to outcomes, one of the things that will suffer the most is your ability to actually listen to people, which of course indirectly or quite directly affects your ability to connect with them. What will happen is because you've got an outcome in mind, you're going to be constantly in simulation mode. You'll be trying to predict what's going to happen. So while someone's talking, you'll be guessing what they mean, guessing what they're trying to say, and doing that as quickly as possible so that you can come up with a response before they're finished. And that way there won't be an awkward silence or anything else that might sabotage your outcomes. That way of thinking is disrespectful to them. You're not letting them be unique. You're not letting them surprise you. You're not letting them be a different human. They just become an enemy that you're in conflict with rather than a human that you're connecting with. So when it comes to respecting others during an interaction, listen as if you can't predict their thoughts. The most practical piece of advice I give around this is assume that the last thing they'll say is the most important thing, and you have to wait for that last thing. And you don't know when it's going to come, so you kind of have to listen to everything. And give yourself permission to stay silent as long as it takes for you to think of a response after they've finished, rather than trying to think of one during the conversation. This kind of respect not only is going to make people feel safe and open up to you, but it'll also allow you to have unique interactions with people rather than scripted, repetitive interactions that most needy people have, where they just steer the thing in the same direction every time. You combine respect with honesty and curiosity, and you'll have a real connection. But no one sees the world like you do. You'll think that they do, but they don't. So respect means allowing them to show you how differently they see the world, allowing them to be different rather than assuming that you can guess the way they are. I promise you, I've got a degree in psychology. I've had training from top psychologists around the world for many, many years. I worked with criminal offenders for directly for 4 years. I managed staff for another 3 years after that. And then I've been a coach for the last 5 years. And I still don't know what people are thinking. Okay? They still surprise me if I listen hard enough. I still get my guesses wrong and my assumptions wrong about them. So unless you've had more training than me, I think it's fair to assume that you can't guess either. Okay? Respect means letting yourself be wrong, letting them show you who they are. And it goes the other way as well. If someone won't let you say your piece, it means interrupting them, stopping them, making sure you get a turn. That's respect for yourself. So that is the release phase. Acceptance and respect brought together. If any of you have any questions or thoughts you want to throw in there, just use the chat box or raise your hand as it is. And we will move on to the final bit, which is just some practical activities you can engage in to bring this all together. Okay? Because this sounds like a lot, these fundamentals. Like, how am I supposed to do all of this stuff in a single day whilst getting on with my life and doing my activities? Well, it can be a very minimal amount of effort required to live by these fundamentals and practice them every day. The first and obviously most obvious one is the morning routine. In 10 minutes in the morning, you can nail most of these values. If you include journaling, you include something that faces fear, and something that gives respect to who you are and makes time for yourself. If you can do all of that in a single morning routine, you kind of nail it every day. At the very least, you'll be frequently, if not, you'll be frequently practicing it, even if it's only for a short time. Frequency is the key. You know, I've been thinking about this for a while now. And of all the things, all the different elements of how you can practice working on yourself, I think frequency is the most important. It has to happen every day. It doesn't have to happen for a very long time, and it doesn't have to be particularly intense or extreme. Those things aren't as important as frequency. It needs to be habitual, these practices. So a morning routine with both meditation, journaling, perhaps a cold shower or something that faces fear, maybe even journaling requires you to face your fear. That nails most of these all at the beginning of the day. It sets you up well. Another supernova activity is to express yourself honestly via a small confrontation every day, whilst practicing something new about how to confront people. If you do this, you pretty much nail every single value. You're respecting yourself. You'll be having put into a place where you have to accept their response. It takes courage and honesty to have a confrontation, and it takes curiosity to figure out what you need to have a confrontation about, and taking responsibility for your life if you go out and set boundaries. Confrontations are one of the most powerful activities you can engage in. They go against all of your fears, and they make you so much more powerful. If you can handle social confrontations, there's not much in this world you can't handle. So those are great where they can take 30 seconds in a day and yet have a lifelong impact that serves you well forever. Another key supernova activity is to regulate your work hours. Regardless of the demand, give yourself a maximum work time and don't breach it. This will force you to make sure the important stuff is done first. If you're only allowed to work 6 hours a day, that's your maximum, and somebody piles your desk full of busy work, you'll have to A, choose which stuff actually needs to be done because you've only got 6 hours, B, set boundaries and confrontations about the people trying to make you busy. And C, respect yourself through a hard working process by taking breaks, even though you feel compulsed to make everyone else happy. So making a maximum limit on your work hours. It's amazing. You think you need 12 hours a day to do your work. If you cut that down to 6, you'll be amazed at how much you actually get done in 6, and the productivity is still the same. But you'll have to stop procrastinating on the important shit. Another supernova activity is to calendar. Use a calendar to socialize, to put socializing and hobbies in as if they're as important as work. To treat your social life and your passion activities as if they make you money. To put them in your calendar and to obey them with the same obedience you obey your work schedule. This is, again, so many values getting nailed at once, but also like I said, we've evolved into a species that thinks working hard is a good idea. It's never made sense. Working hard just makes life miserable. We don't know why we do it, but we all think it's a good idea to do it, and we all feel ashamed if we're not doing it. That doesn't mean we're right. Socializing and hobbies, often by the time it comes to doing them, you're too tired to do it because you've been working too hard. And yet, if you could just get your ass there, you'll enjoy it. I notice this a lot in my own life. It's one of my biggest weaknesses. I get to the end of the week when it's time to go dancing or snowboarding or whatever, and I just can't be fucked. But if I can just get my ass to the event, within 10 minutes, I'm glad I got there. It's the same thing with work. You're like, oh, I can't work today. But if you just get yourself to work, you're like, oh, yeah, I can do it. There's this bit where you think you can't do it, but you totally can if you could just get your ass there. Treat your social life and your hobbies like they're work. And you will make sure to nail a lot of these values. And the last one, the best practice I can possibly recommend is just one new action per day. Every day when you're doing your journaling in the morning, ask, what's the new thing I'm going to do today to challenge myself? That new thing can be mere 10 seconds worth of effort. It does not have to be hours. It could be a phone call. It could be a conversation. It could be a tiny little thing. It could just be jumping in a cold shower. A new thing that means that the value of curiosity is being lived by. And if the value of curiosity is being lived by, odds are you have to live by courage and respect as well. Okay? So these activities I list in the supernova list are the ones that hit a lot of these core values all at the same time. That's why I call it supernova. You're stacking values on top of each other. You're having high integrity with minimal effort and minimal time. And then the rest of the day can kind of be status quo. And you'll get a huge lot out of each day. Each day will feel like it was significant. And yet you didn't have to like plow through a million things throughout the day. So that is it. That is the fundamentals of self-development, according to my notes here on the side. Any final thoughts, questions from you guys before we wrap it up, especially if you have any ideas about other supernova activities? Either chuck it in the chat box there, raise a hand, unmute yourself, whatever you want. Radio silence. All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to assume we're all good for today.